Hi, everyone, and very pleased to meet you virtually. I don't see you all, but I hope that our conversation will be interesting enough to raise some questions, and I won't be able to answer all of them. So I say it right away, because I've been invited to speak about CALICO project, which is a very specific project of the CLTB, but not only the CLTB, which is the Community Land Trust Brussels. And I understand from Dimitra and the other organizers that you already had an overview of different models, what we may call alternative models, whatever alternative means. Also self-organized and collaborative forms of housing. So I assume that the concept of the CLTB, the CLT, it's known. And so then we take the specific case of the of CALICO, which is one project that has been co-financed by the European Commission in Brussels. And I have prepared a PowerPoint, which is very super simple, no fancy PowerPoint, black and white, more or less. But I hope that has enough writings for you to read afterwards and maybe to become more acquainted with the case and become more curious to know more. So thank you very much also for inviting me. I'm very pleased to support the activities of the CoHab. I'm very pleased to be with colleagues and old friends that care for this topic. So now I'm trying to share the screen, which is going to be my Google Drive. And then here is the slideshow. So because the this afternoon was meant to be a duet, a dialogue together with Gert, I assume that my side would have been more on the European perspective. I'm saying this because the Community Land Trust Brussels is a unique case all over Europe of experimenting this model, which is not anymore, I would say, in their case, an alternative, because it's been, widely recognized and very successful in Belgium. So I assume that Gert will explain how it came to life. I interviewed them when I met them first years ago. I think it was 2018. So I have some idea, but I could say that the implementation and the experimentation of this Anglo-Saxon model which was very well known in the US and in the UK, the first experimentation in the continental Europe, which is through the experiment of the Brussels group, was very much a project from activists. So they really went to study what was going on in the US. They went to study the old model of CLT. They really experimented in many different directions before they got the basic grants to experiment with this model in Belgium, in Brussels. And then slowly, step by step, they've been growing and becoming more and more officially recognized. But the story is very interesting because it comes from pretty much from scratch, pretty much from the idea of activists and groups that they wanted to deliver better and more qualitative and more affordable housing for the inhabitants. From Belgium, which is a country which is very much based on home ownership. When I went there, because I am Italian and I was working for the European Commission, and they sent me there, and I knew pretty much nothing about the whole debate of the housing in Belgium. And then they told me that Belgians are known for having a brick in the stomach. So when you're born, you have a brick of the house you're going to own for the rest of your life, which is something that we all know from Southern Europe. So this idea of having a community land trust was an experiment also, and that's, I think, what makes it interesting for us, for Southern European, which was a groundbreaking to a certain extent. So this is just to cover up a little bit of the immense amount of information that Gert would have given you as a main protagonist, as a main driver as a sort of a deus ex machina of the Community Land Trust Brussels and in Belgium, which I hope you're going to meet him in another occasion. So now I get into my role. I take another hat, and which is the hat of the so-called expert, people that are researchers, activists that have different hats, like mine or Dimitra and other people in your group that work for interesting project. And that was one of the very, very interesting one. So I need to explain you the frame, to do like a very brief introduction to say where we locate this project within the European blah, 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 the European investment on urban regeneration and specifically on housing. So very quickly, I'm not going to go through all of this, but I want to show you that there have been a movement since the end of the 90s towards urban regeneration from the European Commission, from the European level, even though not specifically on housing. We don't have specific funding dedicated to housing except for energy efficiency now and other things. But for many, many years, the topic of urban has been accessed in the with the frame of sustainable urban development, with all these accords, agendas, and so on and so forth. What has changed is here in the 2014, if you see here below, you have what is called urban innovative action. So for the first time, the European Commission decides, okay, we have this amount of money. We give the money directly to the city. We forget the member states. We forget the regions. We forget, the kind of agreements. We give money directly to the cities. And we want to have innovative ideas. And they were going to be rewarded with 5 million euros for ideas. And you got one with in Athens as well. And that was the case for the Community Land Trust in Brussels. There were calls, thematic calls on circular economy, jobs, integration of migrants, and so on and so forth. And so there was one call on housing. And the CALICO was this idea proposed by this group of people from the CLTB that include lots of different other partners. That's the structure of the UIA budget. They had 372 million of European regional development funds, which are funds directly given for urban regeneration. And per project, you had this 5 million directly to cities. If the cities, the managing authority, urban authorities would have created a partnership with private, public inhabitants, public-private people partnership, we will call it that way. So this program was, to a certain extent, revolutionary, considering that the European Commission doesn't have a mandate for housing, doesn't have a possibility to give directly money to cities, because it has to go through the member states and the regions, and then eventually to cities. And then it gave money to experiment on something that was not there before, but it can fail and it can succeed. And imagine to give money for a community land trust that did not exist as such in Europe with the European funding. So that was quite groundbreaking to a certain extent. This program, UIA, is still continuing. Now I put it there, but you may want to look at it afterwards. I'm not going to explain it to this, but I'm saying that this program was so successful that it became the core business of what is called the European Urban Initiative. So the Commission still gives money for innovative projects on housing. One municipality of Athens has another funding of 5 million euros. I'm going to follow another one in intergenerational housing, co-housing for elderly people. So this is still continuing from the core business of the former UIA. And that's where CALICO was. So CALICO was led by the Brussels Capital Region as the main urban authorities. It started in 2018 and it was concluded in 2021. So very short period of time, and considering that COVID was in between. And I have to say that I was assigned to follow this project, but I could not follow it very much because I could not travel. And there was so much going on in Brussels in terms of thinking how to solve the issues of creating this community land trust in the system, in the Brussels and the Belgian system. There are lots of experimentation were going on that even, you know, myself as an outsider had hard time to follow. So the project aimed at having affordable housing for vulnerable groups within a caring environment. I'm saying this because it's not only a community land trust experiment, but it's an experiment of creating a different way of living in the city based on care, on community sharing, and creating new services that were people-based at the level of the neighborhoods. Having an open environment within the residency as well. So they had lots of different, it has also a form of educational aspect in it. It's a very complex project because it aims at not only providing affordable housing and decent housing, but creating a model of co-living, of sharing spaces together with the neighborhoods and with the community. Now we're going to see how it rolled out over the 3 years. And I will tell you what I know that has happened since the closure. So as I said, for the UIA, you need to have a consortium of people that come together for co-designing and implementing the idea of creating this format. So you have the Brussels Capital Region, the municipality of Forêt, so where is the project located, the public center for social welfare within the municipality, taking care of specific target group, the regional public authority, the community land trust Brussels, the one Gert was supposed to talk about, a foundation which was created within the community land trust Brussels, so it's nested. The foundation, it's nested in the community land trust. It's called Public Utility Foundation. Then you have Logement pour tous, which is Agence Immobilière Sociale, which stands for AIS. It's something like a social rental agency, social real estate agency. I don't know if you touched upon this in the previous discussion, if it's common knowledge what a social rental agency is.
Not really, but
in a couple of words, it may be an agency which is non-profit or it's within the public authorities. It depends in which country you are. For instance, in Poland, the social rental agency are defined by national laws. But the idea of this social rental agency is that they function as a guarantor for private owners. So in a situation when you don't have enough affordable housing below the market price, the social rental agency takes care of, works sort of a mediator and guarantor between homeowners and potential tenants. And so the homeowners, they are sort of guaranteed by the presence of the social rental agency that the rent will be paid. And the tenants, they have benefits because they pay a rent below the market value. And in the case of Belgium, they also benefit from public support and public subsidies to function as such, to function as a social rental agency. Then you have, please interrupt me anytime. Huh? Then you have Angela D, which is, the name says it, it's Angela Davis from the Black Panther movement. It's an association of feminists which came to life, as I understand, with the idea of providing proper and better housing for people that comply with feminist approach. So maybe mainly women, but people that perceive themselves as a women. So that was the answer that I got in the interview when I was asking, who are your target group? So that's Angela D. You can find online what they do, what are their aims and their activities. So they were partner of the consortium. And then you have another very particular association called PASSAGE or Passage, which means passage. It's a game of words. And so the Passage, it's also an interesting partner because they were dealing with two different particular moments of life, the birth and the death, and how as a community can take care of these two special particular moments in life, and how the neighborhood and people living close by can also support and care for these two crucial moments of our lives. And so there were other groups that have been involved to do research, to do monitoring. Others have been involved in different phases, but these are mainly the core group. So the background, why did they want to do this? At the beginning of the 2018, when CALICO came together, the share of publicly managed and social purpose housing represent 11.8% of the entire Brussels housing stock. And the plan was, which was already very little in 2009, was to have affordable housing about 15% of the Brussels real estate stock. So they were, so to say, behind the planning in terms of, the public policy. So one idea was really to idea of the CLTB to boost the possibility to have more affordable housing in the region. The project wanted to have 34 homes, 34 apartments. They are provided for affordable owner-occupied housing, but also for social rental. And now here becomes the problems, because community land trust is meant for being owner-occupied for the people that belong to the trust. So how to make this mechanism work with the social rental and the mechanism of the CLTB? And that's the main experiment of this project. So the project, I just read this part because it's important, aimed to empower target groups by involving them during the different steps of the project, and aim to develop a community-led model of care that reinforces the autonomy of those in need of support, integrated and intergenerational, intercultural context. So very ambitious in a certain way. And then they wanted to have this accommodation for birth and end of life in a home type of environment, which would be open to the wider community. There would be also a garden for community garden. And they want to have different groups and different people coming together in the same project to strengthen social cohesion and to become, in a certain way, a new model, which could be replicated in other contexts, not only in Brussels, but also in Belgium, but also outside Europe. And that's why, outside Belgium, in Europe, and that's why CALICO was funded. It was closely monitored. Where are we? We are, this is the city center of Brussels, and CALICO is a little bit further down, and it seems to be sort of a periphery, but it's not anymore. So you are very well connected with tram. It's a good location for investment, if you want, in terms of housing, because it's a booming area. And as you see, that was the building site of the CALICO before the project came to life. So it's a quite large area that was under development. So what happened is, first of all, you need to purchase the land, and the CLTB decided to buy the land and the common part of the building. In many other projects of the CLTB, you buy the land and then the building is built afterwards within the agreement of the people in the trust. But that was a particular situation. In a single transaction, it was both the land and the building at one side. Also, the property belonged to a housing development of 125 units that was called Les Sources. And it was originally owned by a normal real estate developer called Belgian Land. It was a limited liability company. I'm saying this because it was a very particular situation in which they could buy sort of the skeleton of the building and the land. So the model was that they bought these two parts, and they had the opportunity, they had to change that, to find some kind of agreement at some point to change also the internal structure of the original building. Because the idea was that the developer, the real estate developer, Belgian Land, had housing unit, a complex of different housing units. They will be then sold to private social housing company that they will manage them in a different way, each in different ways. So CLTB is sort of one of the buyer of the piece of land and the actual building. So then I give the word to he has to do the introduction and everything. So I will continue from that point onward. First of all, thank you, Gert, for introducing. I had like a very, very short version of what you do before you came, and I was in the process of explaining about the purchase of the land in the building, but I was telling the things I know. As I said before, I was assigned to this project by UIA, and I wanted to be there more than I did because of the COVID and things that happened in between. It was very, very hard to really follow the experimentation on the creation of the cooperatives in the model of the community land trust, which is, I think, the very innovative aspect of CALICO that was allowed through the funding. But just to quickly go through the project from the things that I collected and the things that have been written by the university group that has been working on the project. So you see, I was telling you before Gert came, that's where we are. So in the southern part of Brussels, I was telling about the land purchase by the Belgian land and the building, the skeleton of the building that was supposed to be adapted also to the various activities to be covered within the project of CALICO. So you had the main actors, the association, the Passage, the Angela D, the Passage, it's the one I was mentioning you before that was taking care of this two particular moment in life of death and birth, also with this concept of care, community care based, neighborhood based, the Angela D, the Feminist Association, the CLTB with the home ownership and the way Gert just explained, and there were some other part of the building dedicated to collective space, to the common garden, and also to one part, which is the one in green, which is managed by an association called Diogenes. There was a they are dealing with homeless people. So these are two models of housing first. Since Gert mentioned before the allocation procedure, that was very particular because the housing first is managed by the social services of the municipality of Forêt in agreement with this association that is managed the allocation procedure of housing first, and they made a sort of a list of criteria for accessing this of including a maximum of 5 candidates at a time. So that was the initial plan. Since we are late, I'm not going to go through all the details, but the idea was to cover 34 apartments for different groups which had different aims and different target groups. And especially it was in the project taking care of people that could have 50 years old of age at the moving in date. So taking special care of those people that could not access the mortgage. So Gert was saying before that within the community land trust, you go through the list and you're not necessarily, and then there is a support also for accessing loans and mortgages, but in this case, for people that could not access mortgages, that would have been even more difficult to access rental housing. So that's very much in the scheme what was said before, the CLTB. That's a scheme that was also used for UIA. So you have land in the Public Utility Foundation. You have the housing units that are sold to candidates. What is interesting is there's the limited, what was saying before, Gert, was the limited to the gains that can be created from the original prices, which is a rental cap of 25% of added value from the first occupants that is selling, and that makes the process particularly non-speculative, considering that the land is put into public utility using the emphyteus approach that the Belgian law allows to use. So the main innovation, this is a scheme that has been done by the group of people, that have been doing from the university, the academic research and accompanying the project of CALICO. So the model is that the CLTB transfer the ownership of the bricks through a mechanism of leases to intermediary structures. So the intermediary structure would be, in this case, the village cooperative, which is the one referring to the Passage, the group I was telling you before, and to the Fairground cooperative of Angela D. In other words, you have a third, Gert, before you came, I was telling about the Agence Immobilière Sociale, how it works. So the Logement pour tous practically manages the rental units that are by the COP, the Fairground Angela D, and the village, which are leased by the CLTB. So if you want to add further information on this, maybe exemplify the process. So that's here in the middle. You see the social rental real estate agencies, which is the social rental agencies model that exists in a different format in other countries. I was mentioned before that Poland has in the national law, and in the Belgian case, this is called AIS. And so this provides numerous advantages in terms of security of rentals to the homeowners, and maintains also the cost of rents below the market prices. And so this mechanism basically is the main innovation of the CALICO project, because you have cooperatives nested in the CLTB. In a certain way, you have the third actors, which is sort of the social rental agencies, that is directly financed by the Brussels region, by the Brussels capital region, that functions as a guarantor. They manages the private housing. So I'm going very quickly. The governance organization, it's divided into three formats. So you have the institutional part, the inhabitants, and the civil society. And the approach that CALICO adopted is the approach of sociocracy, which means a sort of decision-making process which is not based on majority, but based on consensus, providing safe, psychological safe space for people to take collective decision and to involve the inhabitants in the future of the neighborhood, and which I understand has been also a complicated process to manage over the years. And there has been facilitators actively involved in managing the governance system. There have been also sort of the trainers in a format that future inhabitants would be then trained as a future facilitator in the common building. And there was a quite complicated process of decision-making. The central part with the partners of the CALICO were the steering committee, and then you had several of others committee that were working on specific topic, be on the communication, be on the level of care, which was one of the most important topic of this of a creation of this pilot, which was not a simple co-housing, but it was a model of care for the neighborhood and and the region. And there were also clusters of the future inhabitants, and lots of, as I remember, I mean, from an outsider, there were lots of discussions also on how to design the size of the apartments, who had the right to have like 1 room or 2 rooms. I remember the discussion with Angela D, whether there would be an extra room for people coming to visit in the case, elderly people hosting, grandchildren or something like this. And all these situations, they were constantly reviewed and constantly discussed in all this committee, but also taking care of the general rules of social housing that should be applied in this mechanism. So for my experience as an outsider, it was a very interesting experiment also in terms of participation, which had no precedent in a certain way, because it was experiment on a community land trust, but introducing this element of innovation, of co-creation, of co-designing on a building that was more or less existing because it was purchased by the Belgian land. And so that was, I think, to a certain extent, what the UIA was there for, to allow this experiment to happen. In addition, the single groups, the single organization organized special training, debates on the language, for instance, that we use within the community decision-making process. There was a workshop how to have a feminist approach to housing, which was managed by Angela D. So future inhabitants, but also people from the community, people interested, were invited to participate to labs and workshop on discussing, for instance, here was the timing in space, how it's used if we think in a gender-oriented approach. And that's basically the results. So the results of the building that was inaugurated in September 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So this space on the top, it's the space dedicated to the Passage. It's a common open space also for health oriented encounters, meetings, and information also for people in the neighborhood. So it's not only for the residents of CALICO. This is a model of, this is an example of one of the building that is inhabited. The 34 units, as I said, they were delivered officially in 2021, and the project was officially ended in the October. So it was very quick to a certain extent, considering that there was this stopping of the building site in the middle. There were this whole idea of collaborative decision-making process, which could not happen face-to-face. And that was also very difficult for me to follow, because can you imagine all these working groups that were collaborating and discussing in parallel, but then they had to come together and make sure that everyone was listened to and was happy and had the right to get into the apartment with the right agreement that was promised to them. So it was a marvel to a certain extent that the whole thing was really completed in time and people could enter in the apartment. Some of this gets a little bit complicated, and maybe Gert, can you update on this, because I'm curious to know what happened. Of the apartment, 8 of the units that were on sale, some of them were not given right away because there was a problem with the calculation of the costs that were on the side of the CLTB, because at that time CLTB was not recognized by the Federal Finance Administration as a social housing provider, and at that time they did not benefit of the 6% VAT, which would have lowered enormously the expenses of the CLTB in terms of the cost. So if I well remember, a part of these 8 units were given with a temporary contract to the future homeowner, saying that they could not get back the money they would pay in the temporary contract, but they were already assigned as a homeowner in the mechanism of the CLTB. And the other 3 would enter only when there was a possibility to, access the apartment, the logement, when without a temporary contract. What happened, what I know that happened, but I asked Gert about this, is that afterwards the CLTB was recognized and they had the advantage of having 6% of the VAT, which was, I think, an amazing result, not of CALICO, but the whole work of the CLTB, which were recognized as social housing provider nationwide. But then I read that the government questioned this law, the 6% law, but I don't know in January 2024, but I don't know if it applies also to you, because it was in relation to newly built houses in situation where the house had to be demolished and then rebuilt. And then I've read, and that's why I said, to be confirmed, question. That was the law was reintroduced. So it gets very technical, but I think it's kind of important to know that the whole mechanism was made possible, first of all, because they had, this whole experimentation was possible because they had a 5 million euros budget of co-funding with the European Commission, but also that they changed the VAT, lowering incredibly the cost on the shoulder of the CLTB recognized as a social housing provider. So the other results is that there was an association that was created with CALICO. I don't know how much is functioning at the moment, but the idea was also to keep up with this facilitation of the co-living together beyond the actual funding of UIA, which funded also the sociocracy facilitation to a certain extent. The garden, the community garden in the area, supposed to be open for the neighbors and the residents. I don't know what is the state of the art. And also there was a quite interesting, was a disagreement with a non-profit organization for training on technical management of the passive building to reduce the energy cost in the CALICO housing. So to say, we need to conclude that also extremely quickly, you say that this project in a certain way was experimental in the sense that allowed to have the CLTB recognized with funding at European level, which to my knowledge was unique, at least for now. So with public money at the European level, because of this direct funding bypassing the national level. It is experimental because it covers the experimental on renting within the CLT. It is experimental because it pushed in a certain way. It gives also visibility. They got many prizes internationally as well for the work of the CLT. And so it helped, I think, to a certain extent, to push politically to be recognized for the reduction of the VAT. And also was experimental in terms of intergenerational. It took really care of the fact that in a country that was very much based on home ownership and providing public subsidies for home ownership, they had to take care for people that could not buy the apartment anymore because of reduction of age limitation in terms of accessing mortgages. And there are many others in the direction of care and health and so on. And I think it's a great example. I've been talking about these examples in many different arenas, local level and European level, not because as a package in itself can be replicated, but it can be replicated in terms of ideas. And the non-speculative idea is probably the most important one. And it shows that it can happen if you also play within the cracks of the system and you push also the system into a direction of making this mechanism more visible and doable. So that's, I think, where I will stop, and I will also give the floor to the rest of the group.